I don't expect anyone to think that I'm, you know, born and bred Ouija or something, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not from Glasgow, or I'm not my granny who grew up in Greenock and stuff like that. I don't expect anyone to think that, you know? And I think my grandma would be off her head, to be honest, if she was to think that I didn't think I'm Scottish, do you know what I mean?
Scotland's centre Sione Tuipulotu is the grandson of an Italian and a Scot, the son of a Tongan and an Australian, grew up in Melbourne and even contemplated qualifying for Japan. So just how is it that he ended up here in Scotland? Let's talk about your kaleidoscopic family tree, because I've said it before, I think there must be, do you have like a drawer full of passports? Like, do you have 5 or 6 that you could just take your pick from?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a fruit salad, to be honest. It was interesting growing up just because I would say we grew up primarily under my dad's, you know, Tongan heritage, you know what I mean? But my mum definitely had her part of it in it as well. And to be honest, if you ask any of our family members, they probably say we're more like my mum than we are like my dad. I think Tongans kind of have the reputation of being quiet men and very reserved men, but we're kind of like my mum, and we're pretty bubbly people. And no, I kind of like that, get the best of both worlds. And I suppose I'm proud of all my cultures.
How much did that inspire you? Or how did it mold you, your parents' journeys?
I've always been really close with my dad. My parents actually split up when I was younger, then they got back together. And that was a rough period for me. I think that's where I got probably most lost I've been. And that was around when I was about 13, 14. But he's always been someone that I've looked at who works hard, and he's always shown that. But I think during those periods, my mum kind of held me together during that time, and we spent a lot of time with my mum. So I think then when I started transitioning from a boy to a man type of thing, I clung on, back when my parents were back together, I clung on to my dad a little bit and looked to him for advice. And I would never talk to my dad about emotional stuff, do you know what I mean? But I could talk to my mum about that type of stuff. And I think that's where I kind of had the perfect childhood, in terms of I could talk to my mum about the stuff that was doing my head in terms of emotional stuff, and then I could talk to my dad about, you know, career stuff. I kind of look at their lives and mine as kind of like, I don't want to put their hard work to waste, to be honest. I want to take every opportunity I get and try and, yeah, I suppose make them proud.
Talk to me about you as a youngster playing rugby, growing up in Melbourne. Was it always your first love?
I played soccer actually, from the age of 4 to 13. My dad played rugby growing up, so he kind of just switched me over. And then, yeah, I don't know, Melbourne, it's not a hot spot for rugby, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of other bigger sports there, that AFL and rugby league and stuff like that. So rugby's not considered, you know, such a big sport, so there's not many eyes on it and stuff like that. And I think that just kind of molded my path, you know, in terms of how I was coming up. And there was a couple of other Melbourne boys that came through with me. Rob Leota, who's the current Melbourne Rebels captain. It was different, if I would say that. It's not like we were coming through in Cape Town or we were coming through in Joburg, where rugby's huge, you know what I mean? Not many people were interested with rugby in Melbourne, so it was a different come up, if you know what I mean. But we kind of always play with chips on our shoulders because of it, and we really take pride in coming from Melbourne. I know it's a big part of who I am, is coming from Melbourne, so yeah, I take that everywhere I go, is that I'm really, you know, a Melbourne boy, and I love representing Melbourne in terms of that, no matter where I go.
And so you were this really promising youngster who got a bursary to go to a really big, important school, travelled, like an hour and a half to school every day and back, made sacrifices, played under 20s for Australia. And then how did you end up in Japan?
I think I went through, everyone's got their own rugby sport story, I suppose, but mine's a little bit different, just because I think I started my career really well, and I kind of hit the scene, and it was just kind of like, oh, a young kid coming up, you know. I played 3 years of Aussie 20s, and it was just kind of like my career was going real well.
Opportunities coming now for Australia. The offload is there, the first try is there. It's Sione Tuipulotu, a well-worked try from Australia.
I debuted for the Rebels when I was 18, and I played a lot of rugby in those first couple of years when I was at the Rebels, and I think I hit a wall a little bit. The force got cut from Super Rugby, and Dave Wessels and his coaching staff came from the force to Melbourne, and that didn't really work out for me for whatever reason. And I struggled a little bit just because I had been going good, and this was probably my first little bit of adversity in rugby, you know what I mean? So I struggled a little bit because I think that was my first time where I saw the professional side of the game, and it's just kind of like, you're not going to get along with every coach, and it's more about how you deal with it, you know, in a professional environment, and I just wasn't equipped to do that. And I kind of just wore my heart on my sleeve, and he knew every time what I was thinking in terms of that, just because I was open about it, you know. If I wasn't happy, they could probably see it. And yeah, I don't regret it, mainly just because I think I learned from it. But I definitely see it from the other lens as well now, in terms of if I was the coach type of thing, and how, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not that I sympathise with them or anything like that. I still have a little bit of pain in my heart because it was my home club, and you know, I played with all these Melbourne boys that I grew up with, you know, and then all of a sudden a new coach comes into the environment and brings his players from force, and at the time I just kind of felt like, well, this is our home, and it just kind of feels like you're trying to tell us how, you know what I mean? Maybe that's controversial to say, but it's just how I felt at the time. So the best thing I ever did was move to Japan. And I think I just learnt life lessons over there. My cousin, Billy, who's a Tongan international, he was over there with his young family. And yeah, I got 2 years with him, and I think moving away from my family, where I was really comfortable in Melbourne with all my friends, and going to an isolated place in Japan, we live in a really, really rural area in Iwata, I kind of had to grow up pretty quick, and he showed me, I think, more about life than rugby. And I think that's where I did most of my maturing, to be honest, and saw life through a bigger lens.
And then Gregor Townsend says, Glasgow?
Yeah.
And you go, yeah.
I say Glasgow.
Glasgow.
Well, Gregor kind of reached out to me when I was coming off contract in Japan, and Yamaha were keen to keep me, and I was kind of making up my decision of whether to go home and try and play for the Wallabies, or, I mean, when Gregor called me and said, look, would you be interested in coming over to Scotland and, you know, trying to play for Scotland? And I think I don't know, for some reason over that phone call, I want to say the phone call went for about 30 minutes, but I don't know, for whatever reason I trusted him, and to be honest, as soon as I got off that phone call, I made my decision that I was going to go to Scotland and give it a crack. And a couple months later, I was on a plane, and I was actually, here was the first place that I came. Because it was during COVID, so I did my quarantine here actually, and 2 weeks in one of those rooms. Yeah, it felt like I was in juvie or something, you know. So I did 2 weeks in there, but then we came out of quarantine, trained a little bit, because that was the summer tour, if you know what I mean, like the build up for the summer tour. And then one of the boys got COVID, so I went straight back into the rooms for another 2 weeks. Oh. So during that 4 weeks, I was like, nah, up here, you know what I mean? Bad move. Like, I was like,
get me on a plane.
I was like, because I spent 4 weeks in a hotel, and I was just thinking to myself, what am I doing? You know what I mean? And then when I popped out, went down and met all the Glasgow boys, and just kind of hit it off with them, and then I've been happy ever since, to be honest.
So now when you fill in forms, your house's address is in Glasgow. Are you a Scot?
Yeah, I definitely don't look Scot, I know that.
Yeah.
And I know my name's not Scot, so I think for me, the way I look at it all is just kind of like, I don't expect anyone to think that I'm, you know, born and bred Ouija or something, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not from Glasgow, or I'm not my granny who grew up in Greenwich and stuff like that. I don't expect anyone to think that, you know? And I think my grandma would be off her head, to be honest, if she was to think that I didn't think I'm Scottish, do you know what I mean? And I got it in me, you know what I mean? No one can ever really deny that, and I don't feel any outside pressure of people thinking that I'm Scottish, or I know I'm Australian. Like I said, I'm very proud to be from Melbourne, you know what I mean? But I also know I have Scottish heritage, and I represent my grandma, and I don't really take that lightly at all, you know? So when people say, you know, oh, these people aren't Scottish or whatever and stuff like that, I find it a little bit disrespectful to my grandma, you know? And for me, it doesn't affect how I play or how I perceive myself. I know I'm Australian with Scot in me, and that's kind of all that really think about.
What kind of player are you? Are you one of those people who can just fire wherever you are? I
think if my heart's not in it, then I won't play it well no matter where I am. And I think that's kind of my learnings from when I was in Melbourne. My heart wasn't in it, and I was making everyone unhappy around me. So when I came to Glasgow and I settled in with my life and stuff like that, after a couple of months, I just kind of felt that I was happy. And You know, it makes a difference when a coach wants you, when he wants you, you feel wanted, you want to play good for them. And for me, I think I play the game on a very emotional standpoint. So if I feel wanted and I like them, it's not about liking your teammates, but it's almost like you don't want to let them down type of thing. You know, and I'm enjoying my life off the field, which is really important for me. And I think that's where I play my best rugby, is when I'm happy off the field.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.